Welcome to Rich Planet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. If you watched last week's show, you will know we were talking about energy, and in particular the suppression of energy technologies which could revolutionize the planet and get rid of the need for oil, coal and nuclear as power sources. Here to help me look into this difficult and murky subject is Andrew Johnson. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks for inviting me back, Richard.
Okay, now I think we mentioned Nikola Tesla last time, and I'm just going to read something from him, and just tell us who Tesla was, Andrew, and what his importance is in all of this.
Well, Tesla was basically a Serbian guy he was very unusual in that he was able to construct machines in his head and actually run them and then check for wear. All in his head, and he designed many bits of equipment and bits of technology. For example, he made the first X-ray photograph. It appears that he sent the first radio signals before Marconi did, if you look at the research. And he's remembered in our physics for the unit of magnetic flux, the Tesla, which measures the strength of a magnetic field. That's one of the units that's used, as well as the Gauss.
The Tesla coil.
And the Tesla coil, of course, that's what most people seem to have heard of him about, which is a method of generating high voltage electricity and doing various things with that.
And he invented several of the most important things that are still used today in generating our electricity, the polyphase motor and generator,
right,
which is basically what's powering this room now, a polyphase generator. But he, in 1891, he made this quote: "Throughout space there is energy. Is this energy static or kinetic? If static, our hopes are in vain. If kinetic, then it is a mere question of time that man will succeed in attaching their machinery to the very real work of nature. Many generations may pass, but in time our machinery will be driven by a power obtainable at any point in the universe." You care to try and interpret that, Andrew?
Well, I mean, again, we get onto this concept of radiant energy, and I suppose you can liken it to the example, sometimes the analogy I use is a windmill, in that, you can be aware of this wind sometimes, or sometimes you're not even aware of the wind. But if you put up a windmill, you can extract energy from the atmosphere using a windmill that you wouldn't otherwise be able to exploit, because this kind of the radiant energy, the movement of the air around the surface of the Earth, you can then extract energy from that process. And Tesla's essential observation was that we live in this sort of sea of energy, which we can't normally perceive. But if you build the right equipment, this sort of windmill that works at a level of electrons and so on, and electrical fields, magnetic fields, if you can build some type of windmill to tap into that source of energy, then you can exploit it.
Because we're not talking about molecules or atoms or anything. He's talking about the fabric of space. In other words, if I get a piece of space above my desk, 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot, that's space, okay, and I take out all of the air from it, so it's pure space. What he's saying is locked in there, just in space itself, is a sea of energy which is almost infinite. That's effectively what he's saying.
Essentially.
But it's a case of how you design a machine which can tap into and get that energy out of that space. And I think some of the devices that we're going to discuss today possibly do tap into that. And this is what we call zero-point energy as well. It's also referred to.
Right, or free energy is another term that's used.
Yeah, and some of the devices are alleged to be that, but some of them aren't, like the Pons and Fleischmann that we discussed last week. It's not claiming to be.
Not really, not in the same sense.
Yeah. Okay, now the first, I'm just going to read this out. This is as early as 1909. I think he was an engineer of some kind, Dr. Thomas Henry Morey is alleged to have invented such a device. Now, whether this was actually tapping into energy of the quantum vacuum or whether it was some kind of, I don't know, cosmic energy of the universe, whatever you want to call it, but I'll just read this out. From 1909 to 1943, Dr. Thomas Henry Morey worked on the development of devices to harness what he termed radiant energy. This device, measuring about 3 foot square and weighing 60 pounds, having nothing more than an antenna and an earth wire, could provide 50 kilowatts of electricity for several hours. Morey claimed that his array of tubes, capacitors and inductors was tuned to the frequency of the universe. His tubes, costing around $500 each, contained a pellet made from tricoluminescent zinc and some kind of radioactive material which acted as a kind of diode, allowing energy to pass more easily in one direction than in the other. He had difficulty obtaining sufficient supplies of material to manufacture his tubes, of which 1 in 4 worked properly. His device contained 29 tubes, but in theory there was no limit to the number which could be used and therefore no limit to the energy which could be collected. And there's photographs of him with this box with racks of light bulbs, you know, glowing. That's, as far as I'm aware, the earliest invention that makes this claim, although people do claim that those that built the pyramids possibly knew about this. And
Right. I mean, you know, you get various sort of claims that are made, some of which seem to be more reliable than others. But if you look at the work of Tesla and some of his experiments, and I've, you know, put these into a presentation that I've put together about these topics, which we mentioned last week. And there's a chap called Pulsness, and he's reproduced some of Tesla's original experiments. Mm-hmm. You know, and this idea of producing this array of light bulbs being lit up from a radiant device, that's something similar to what Tesla was able to do with his wireless system. Right. Although he needed some type of transmitter to actually transmit the energy to his receiver, which would then be connected to the light bulb array to light it up. Right. But if Morey's device obviously seems different to that, if he's just tapping into the 0 point field directly to extract the energy from that directly. Mm-hmm. Somewhat reminiscent also of a later device, much simpler and probably much more basic, that Wilbert Smith, who was a Canadian radio engineer who worked in the 50s, he came up with a circuit which could extract energy from the Earth's magnetic field as well. So there seems to be there seem to be a number of methods where you can extract energy from this 0 point field. Right. It's a question of how easy it is to build it and how much energy you can get out to do anything that's useful.
Now, another device which I think makes this claim was invented by somebody called Adam Trombley. Now, I spoke to Adam about 3 years ago. I had about a 2-hour conversation with him, and he told us a lot of detail about what had happened to him and about how basically his device was stolen from him by the US government. Now, you can look up his patent online. It's this is a bit of a mouthful. It's a closed path homopolar generator. Okay. Now, I've looked at this patent quite closely, and there were 1 or 2 very interesting points about it, because the claim he makes is that this generator generates 250% power out to of the power that you put in. So it's getting energy from somewhere. Now, I'll just explain it for the viewers, Andrew. I've got a few props here. Now, in electrical engineering, we have 2 laws that govern all rotating motors and generators, and this is Fleming's left-hand and Fleming's right-hand rules. Okay, so motors all work by Fleming's left-hand rule, and generators Fleming's right-hand rule. And what you do is you put your hand like this so that your fingers, your thumb and first 2 fingers, are all at right angles to each other. Okay, so this is the left-hand rule and the right-hand rule. So in a generator, following Fleming's right-hand rule, if it's moving that way, if that's the orientation that you're getting movement of the rotor or the stator, the second finger is the current, so the electric current's going that way, and the forefinger is the magnetic field. So all electric generators will have these three vectors, okay? Motion, magnetic field, and electric current, all operating at exactly 90 degrees to each other. Now there are various different configurations of motor and generator, but they all follow that principle. Now, one of these configurations is known as the Faraday disc. If we get just a disc, let's just say this CD is made of copper, i.e. a conductor, and I put it on some kind of spindle to allow it to rotate. Okay, it's conductive. So the motion is going around this way. Okay, so if I use my thumb to say that the motion is going around that way. If I put a magnetic field downwards, okay, going through the disc, okay, so that's two of the vectors. We've got motion and we've got field. The finger is going from the center of the disc out to the rim, and that's the current. So if we pass a magnetic field through the disc and then spin it, we get a current coming out. So you can connect wires to the center of the disc and to the rim of the disc using usually a brush. You can then get a voltage from that disc. Obviously, the faster you spin it in the field, the more electricity you'll get out of it, or the higher the voltage will be. Okay. Now, what Trombley's done in his device, normally you would have something which generates this magnetic field through the disc, and you would have some kind of what you call an air gap, a gap between the device which is generating the field and the thing which is spinning. Now, Trombley in his device, he used, I think it's a copper rotating disc, but it wasn't a thin disc like this. It was a big fat cylinder. Okay, so that's allowed. Imagine that's a solid copper disc. That's allowed to spin. Okay. Now, what Trombley did to generate the magnetic field through the disc, okay, he didn't just use normal stationary magnets. He used coils, okay, which can be excited using a DC current. So these coils, which I've got with these bits of toilet roll, representing the coils, would be mounted around the outside. So each one of these coils is generating a magnetic field up and then down through the disc and then back round, and then also outward as well, like this. But what he did very cleverly, after he's attached these coils to the disc, he's then enclosed the magnetic flux path in a magnetic circuit by adding a ferrite material, so that he's got a closed magnetic circuit, and that increases the efficiency. But not only that, he actually connects. Normally, the way that I conceive of a machine working like this is that there's a gap between the thing that's generating the field and the disc, but he connected everything together. So he's the coils and the thing that's generating the field all rotating together. Now, in my view, that shouldn't work, because the flux lines are not being cut by the disc, but apparently that works. And because you've got a closed path in the magnetic circuit, none of the energy is lost in that circuit. So you get no or very little magnetic losses. And apparently, if you tap the voltage off from the center using a brush to the outside, you get 2.5 times more out than you obviously have a motor driving this than the motor takes. So apparently Trombley, he went to the UN and he demonstrated it in the late 1980s, and then he took it to the White House, and then it was confiscated from him. And I do believe that Trombley has in fact had another device which he's also had problems with. I know that he had his lab, he had equipment taken from his lab. You've heard of Adam Trombley, have you not, Andrew?
Yes, I have, and that explanation that you gave there was brilliant, because I've only looked in passing at Trombley, but he does. There are lectures given by him which you can access on YouTube. So I think I found a couple of hours lecture by him from, I don't know, early 2000s, late 90s. So you can look at that and find out a bit more about some of the research that he's done. But what you've described there, his device being confiscated, follows a very similar pattern. And then, as you say, that it was sent to the patent office as well, so they're going to know about it. So we do know that once that goes to the patent office, they've got information as to where he is and what the device does, because he's told them in the patent. So if that information is then fed to a third party, they can go and act on that information in a way that they want to. But that description, and the fact that it was based on the homopolar generator, the moment you described that to me, because I wasn't actually aware that that's what the Trombley device was based on, the Faraday homopolar generator, that immediately reminded me of the N machine, which was developed by Bruce De Palma, who was he was also at MIT in the 70s and 80s, and he was a PhD there. He worked there, and he developed this, as I said, N machine, which he also claimed could produce energy 5 times more than you put into it, and that was also based on a homopolar generator. And he said in a video clip that you can find on YouTube, and I've got this in my presentation, that he was told, well, basically he was visited by the Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who heard about his N machine, came to see it working, and then Edgar Mitchell made De Palma a paltry offer to buy out the machine, and De Palma says, no, I'm not, I wouldn't sell up for that. And then Mitchell said to him, Edgar Mitchell, the same Apollo 14 guy, said to
the sixth man on the moon,
the sixth
allegedly,
man to never walk on the moon.
Sorry?
Yeah, exactly, yes. The sixth man to not be on the moon, so he could be somewhere else at the same time.
So you don't think Mitchell walked on the moon?
No, he didn't. He didn't walk on the moon. That's a whole other story. But
right, okay.
Anyway, it depends how much of this you edit in or out.
Yeah.
But I'm just going into this.
So Mitchell, so it's a device using a similar principle to Trombley's, over unity, allegedly called an N machine.
The N machine.
Dr. Edgar Mitchell, who we know as the Apollo 11 astronaut, not Apollo 11, Apollo whatever, 14, tries to buy his device.
Correct, or it makes him an offer. De Palma refuses, and then Edgar Mitchell says to De Palma, according to De Palma, if you're going to go around doing this sort of thing in California, you're going to get your head blown off, which of course De Palma said was a threat. And De Palma further, and this is another topic I wanted to comment on, says that, Mitchell then was at that time involved with the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and that is still going, IONS, Institute of Noetic Sciences, and Mitchell talks about that, and there's various other people involved with that. I know that Uri Geller has been involved with
Mitchell's very much into healing using electromagnetic fields and telepathy or consciousness, this kind of thing. Psychic phenomena.
And that falls under the remit of this IONS research that he claims to be, kind of involved with helping to get credibility for. And De Palma says that that's basically a CIA front, that those sorts of organisations like IONS are a CIA front to keep an eye on what people are doing, who are coming up with these free energy devices, what sort of things they've developed, how they're planning to develop them. And that's what De Palma says in this clip. De Palma himself, he ended up dead in 1997. I'm not quite clear of the circumstances of his death. Claims were made about him having an overdose of drugs and being on alcohol. Again, I don't know whether those.
Quite a lot of these people end up dead, Andrew. We've got another one. We've got another one.
Yeah, correct. So De Palma ends up dead. So I suggest that people go and look into that.
So you think Dr. Edgar Mitchell is an operative then? Of
some kind.
Right.
And going into what De Palma said about IONS, my own experience in terms of Stephen Greer's energy initiatives, one of which was called SEAS Power, SEAS Power, Space Energy Access Systems Power, which Greer put onto the table and set in motion in 2001 following the Disclosure Project press conference. He again, set up a website. If you had a free energy device, you could go onto this site. You could say, fill in a form to send to Greer describing your device and why, what you thought the potential for investors to get money from it was, and he would then connect you with the investor and get your device developed. That initiative then kind of faded away around about 2005 or so, 2006, and then Stephen Greer comes out again in 2007 with something he called Aero 2012. And I looked at this because I was suspicious in 2007 when he came out with this, because it looked identical to SEAS Power. So I went and checked the two websites, which I think did actually overlap for a while in running. And the websites for these things were identical, with all the same articles, the same forums. And I've written this up in an article on my website. It's called Something in the Aero. And you can look at that, and to me, what Stephen Greer was doing was collecting information about these devices.
Right. So you think that many of these organizations that encourage people to come forward with their inventions on a website or what have you are basically a honey trap, so they can keep an eye on anyone who's managed to achieve anything, and then
Right.
just cover it up.
Essentially, they pass information to a third party, which then decides whether
There's anything to it.
yeah whether they buy the person out, or they wrap them up in legalese, or they offer
they
them a
poison
business
them in
plan.
a restaurant.
Yeah, or poison them in the restaurant, which we'll probably come on to,
Right.
and so on.
Okay, Andrew. Well, we're going to be talking more about alleged free energy devices after this.